It's the GP will often happily request a full set of thyroid hormones, but the lab where the request goes to will often say, right, if TSH is normal, there's absolutely no point us doing the rest of these tests. Let's save some money and just do TSH. So if we just get TSH done and it's normal, we're not going to see the rest of the panel. TSH is abnormal, we'll get free T4. If free T4 is normal, they won't test anything else. If free T4 is abnormal, you'll get free T3. And it's like this cascade of what governs what test you can have.
Welcome! Today we have a fascinating guest, Kate Knowler. Kate has a unique journey that led her from a successful career as a nutritional therapist in the lively city of London to becoming a phlebotomist. Not only does she draw blood, but she also assists fellow nutritionists in deciphering the intricacies of blood lab results. She's also the author of a series of 4 books on how to interpret blood tests. Now, please welcome Kate.
Thank you, Severine.
What inspired this transition?
In lockdown 2020, I had to close my clinic because we couldn't work. We couldn't do face-to-face clients. We were considered non-essential, which is fine, but it meant I couldn't really see my clients. And then when lockdown lifted, I was like, okay, fine. Seeing my clients again, fantastic. Let's send them off to their GP for a blood test. But GPs weren't seeing their patients. So I couldn't send a client to their GP for a blood test because their GPs wouldn't see them and therefore they couldn't get those blood tests done. So what I was having to do was find private blood tests for them. We started with finger prick tests, not always successful. So then I was like, okay, find private nurse. And I thought, this is ridiculous. It's so expensive for my clients. I thought, let's cut the middleman. Let's qualify as a phlebotomist. I went off to a college. I learned how to do blood draws. I was coached by another phlebotomist for a few months so I learned how to do it properly. And then I started taking blood from my clients. And as part of that lockdown, when my business was closed and I was studying phlebotomy, I also started to write my first book. So my first book is called Blood Labs. What it covers is how to interpret the blood results. And it was more of a lockdown project. Like, what am I going to do for 4 months while I'm not working? So I wrote the book thinking my mum would buy a copy and that would be it. I'd have a copy, my mum would have a copy, done. But my name would be on Amazon. And it went bestseller within a week. So nutritional therapists were buying it and saying it was amazing. And that what I was teaching them was so good, like simplifying complex blood results into simple patterns. And so from book 1, I now have 4 books. I now have a career in teaching phlebotomy, teaching nutritional therapists. And I am still a nutritional therapist. I do still see some clients, not many, but I do still see some clients. Queen of all things blood is what I call myself now.
There are often misconceptions about blood tests. Could you shed light on some of these and help us understand the facts, please?
Misconceptions about bloods are that some people think we can test too much. So the more you test, the more data you get, the more you can understand what's going on in your body. But sometimes doctors will refuse to do extra blood tests because there's nothing wrong with you and you don't need to have those tests done. And I kind of get their point. But also, the more data we have, the more we can help you, the more we can see and we can be preventative. Maybe we can see some insulin resistance coming in. If there's insulin resistance, that could explain your fatigue, your weight resistant, your inability to lose weight. It could explain why you feel sleepy after eating. And then if we can see those clues in the blood, because we've done a nice extensive panel, we can then start to help you. And if we can start to help you, then it doesn't have to get to the point of type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes before you get the help that you need. That's kind of the difference, I guess, with blood testing through the NHS and blood testing through a private nutritional therapist, is that we're looking for preventative.
Could you give us some examples of typical blood tests that you work with?
I work a lot with clients who are very, very tired and they've seen their GP, they've been told there's nothing wrong with you, get more sleep. Then they come to see someone like myself and we do an MOT blood test. So my absolute basic minimum blood test would be a full thyroid panel. That's looking at TSH, free T4, free T3, the thyroid antibodies. That's the minimum I would do for a thyroid function panel. We look at full iron panel. So not only ferritin, but also iron binding capacity, saturation. We would do serum B12, maybe an active B12, serum folate, vitamin D. We look at inflammation markers. That would be my absolute basic panel. I've got that set up with a few different labs now because I use it so much. So if someone doesn't want to use a certain lab, great, don't worry, I've got it with a different lab. Let's just use my panel from there. And then if I want to do more extensive testing, so I might do a full blood count as well as all of what I've just listed: liver function, kidney function, HbA1c, lipids. So again, that level of panel is very basic. That's still what your GP could do. If your GP could test everything, my full MOT would be what your GP would do. I have an advanced panel that I'm writing with a lab at the moment, and that's including lots of apolipoproteins, small dense LDL cholesterol, so a very advanced lipids profile. It's available with one lab in London at the moment, but I'm trying to get it with a lab that's going to work nationwide so that we've got that accessibility, because understanding your lipids is really important. Your cholesterol isn't necessarily the bad guy. If you've got high cholesterol, there may be a bigger picture going on. And the full advanced lipids panel helps us to understand what that bigger picture is and whether you really need to be thinking about statins or whether you just need to sort the bigger picture out first.
Being a woman in her 40s, are there specific blood labs that are ideally recommended on a regular basis but are often skipped due to costs or reluctance from the GP?
Women in our 40s, we make less progesterone. We start to stop or slow down the number of ovulations we have in a year. Our estrogen kind of comes down. But unfortunately, the NICE guidelines, which is what your GP surgery is not so much governed by, but guided by. So the NICE guidelines suggest that over the age of 45, hormone tests are no longer recommended. Just put the client on HRT if they're having hormone issues. But what if you don't need all that HRT? What if it's not your estrogen that's come down? You don't actually need estrogen patches, estrogen gels, estrogen tablets. What if it's just your progesterone that's out of balance? What if all you needed was progesterone support? That could be natural through B6. It could be stress reduction techniques, so yoga, meditation, swimming. What if that was all you needed right now? I'm not saying forever, but for right now to help you feel a bit better. Maybe too much estrogen could cause more problems like histamine issues and, other problems. So for me, that's probably the most frustrating thing as a woman in her 40s. I mean, I'm 43, and if I go to my GP and ask for hormone tests, they're like, you're getting older. It's probably just menopause. And I'm like, it's not menopause. Like, it's really not yet. I'm 43. So it can be really frustrating as we get into our 40s and GPs are just like, no, we're just told not to test your hormones anymore. Thyroid as well. It's not the GP that's not helping. It's the GP will often happily request a full set of thyroid hormones, but the lab where the request goes to will often say, right, if TSH is normal, there's absolutely no point us doing the rest of these tests. Let's save some money and just do TSH. So if we just get TSH done and it's normal, we're not going to see the rest of the panel. TSH is abnormal, or get free T4. If free T4 is normal, they won't test anything else. If free T4 is abnormal, you'll get free T3. And it's like this cascade of what governs what tests you can have. Often your T4 is normal, your free T4 is normal, and your TSH is normal, but your conversion of T4 to T3 is really bad. And that is where the problem happens. And if we don't know it's there, we can't support you. That's why I always do a full thyroid panel with any client.
That's fascinating. I didn't know about that. I knew the NHS typically tests for one. I have a thyroid issue. I have Hashimoto's. Because I'm also a nutritional therapist, I know that testing TSH is not sufficient, but I didn't understand why they were not testing more. I didn't realize there was this cascade. That was my next question, actually, because I know that for thyroid issues, you need not just one marker, but you need a list of them, which you mentioned earlier in this discussion. Are there any other tests that you would recommend doing privately?
I had some vouchers from a blood test lab that I use. I've ordered so many tests over the last 6 months that they sent me some vouchers to order a test for myself. And I was like a kid in a sweet shop. I was like, oh, what am I going to test on myself? I was so excited. So I've gone for the works. I've gone for full thyroid, full iron, full B12, so serum and active B12, full blood count, serum folate, vitamin D. Always test your vitamin D. You cannot predict your vitamin D. I don't care where you live in the world. I don't care how many holidays you have. If you haven't tested your vitamin D in the last 6 months, go and get it tested. It probably needs looking at. Unless maybe you live abroad, you live your life on the beach and you don't wear sun protection, in which case it might be okay, but you might be sunburnt. So yeah, it's difficult with vitamin D. Test it. I'm having my full lipids. I'm having advanced lipids. I'm having, it's just, the list is long. I was just like, so exciting. But definitely do an MOT. Full thyroid, iron, B12, folate, vitamin D. They are your minimums. If you don't know those numbers and you're feeling tired, you probably need to get them tested. I mean, it's the same with iron. So your NHS GP, unless they think you've got an iron overload, so too much iron, all they can request is serum ferritin, which is great as a marker of iron stores. But if you've got an infection or any kind of inflammation like bone pain, arthritis, if you've caught the flu, if you've had COVID, if you just had vaccines, anything like that, your inflammation markers are going to be a bit higher. And serum ferritin is one of those inflammation markers. So if you just have serum ferritin measured and you were sick or inflamed at the time of testing, your ferritin will come back normal or maybe raised, but that might be falsely raised. And without testing a full iron panel and your full blood count at the same time, we can't know either way. So ferritin on its own, not particularly useful through the GP, but like I say, it's not the GP. Like, they would love to do the test that we ask if we ask for them and we justify them. It's the labs that are pushing back and saying, no, we're going to save you £5 here. You don't need this. And it's so frustrating from a therapist's point of view, sending their client to their GP for a free blood test because, we pay our taxes. Our GP's there to help us. If your client is ill, you send them to their GP. and the GP can't help. And it's just like, oh, it's so frustrating. We do the best we can. What I'll often do is send a client to their GP if I have really major concerns, get as much done as we can through the GP, and then we fill in some of the blanks privately. It's another way of doing it.
And you mentioned already the finger prick test. I know there are some platforms like Thriva and Medichecks that offer quite an extensive range of tests, whether it's thyroid or iron and so on. Do the results hold the same reliability as a traditional blood draw in a lab setting like yours offer?
I'm currently running a few trials. We've just done a trial on homocysteine where we did a venous blood draw on 6 participants and a finger prick blood draw on 6 participants. Now, they went to different labs. We were testing the different labs because one is significantly cheaper than the other. So we were like, okay, this lab's really cheap. Homocysteine is a really important marker when you're looking at your lipids profile and your cardiovascular risk and things like that. So we wanted to be able to access, to rely on this cheaper lab. So we tested it, but the results are so varied that we don't know whether that finger prick was actually reliable. I've got another test coming up for vitamin D. So we're going to do a venous blood draw on 6 to 10 participants for vitamin D and do a finger prick at the same time. This time we'll send it back to the same lab and get the same lab to look at the test results. So then we can compare their finger prick to their venous blood draw and we'll know whether the finger prick or the venous is more reliable. I know that there is a little bit of variety between finger prick and venous because the sample size is smaller. So when you send a venous blood draw, you're sending between 5 and 10 mils of blood. Those tubes look huge. They're like less than a teaspoon in one of those tubes. It's a vacuum. It looks a lot bigger than it is. So yeah, it's about a teaspoon of blood you send there. When you send a finger prick, it's about 1 to 2 mils of blood. So it's a lot smaller, the sample there. So there's a lot less blood to get the information from. So I don't know the answer at the moment, but it is something that for 2024, we're going to find out how reliable finger pricks are because there's so many companies selling them now. Holland and Barrett's are doing it. Zoe's doing it. Like you say, Thriva, Medichecks, they're all over my Instagram ads. My Facebook ads are just filled up with finger prick tests. Are they reliable? We're going to find out this year.
I had an interesting experience with having different results from blood draw and fingerprint tests. 2 years ago, I decided to check vitamin D on 2 different tests, and vitamin D was included. One was with a big lab as part of a big panel, and I had to have the blood draw. And then the second one, I used one of these, fingerprint tests. One was beginning of the month, the blood draw, and one was the end of the month, and it was October. And my vitamin D levels had half,
Wow.
which was huge. I mean, I know I have a vitamin D genes that is not, the best one, but I was like, that doesn't sound normal. Hence my question today.
I think it's definitely something we need to investigate. And the homocysteine test that we did, I mean, it wasn't a slight variation. Everyone's was completely different out of all 6 participants. And some, their finger prick was lower, and on some, their finger prick was higher. So it wasn't like everyone was consistently 1 point lower or 2 points lower. It was all over the place. I mean, we assumed the venous because we took a blood draw from the arm, we spun it in the centrifuge, we just sent the serum back to the lab. So it's the most accurate way you can test anything. It's the most stable in the post compared to a finger prick onto a card. So we believe the venous one is more reliable, but we'd have to look into that further. But we're not keen on the cheaper lab for the homocysteine at the moment.
Actually, I have another experience, but about thyroid panel. And this one, they were pretty consistent. I guess It depends also on the marker.
It might be the labs as well.
Experience. Yes. Moving on to test interpretation. With the varying ranges across labs, how can we discern which are the optimal ranges for good health and when to be cautious about certain ranges?
Yeah, so different markers vary. Something like serum B12, the range will vary from lab to lab and from GP surgery to GP surgery. The reason for that is it's a bell curve average. So they take 100% of the participants having their blood taken in a certain time frame. I don't know what that time frame is. They don't tell us. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year, maybe it's a day. They take 100%. 98% of those readings will be the normal in the middle. And then the bottom couple of percent and the top couple of percent, they're your abnormal readings. Your normal range starts from here, goes all the way up here, all the way down to over here, trying to be on camera there. So this is all your normal range. That's why it varies from lab to lab. My optimal range for B12 is actually often above the normal range for the GP surgery. And that's because I work a lot with fatigue clients and we want them to have optimal B12. So most of my clients who have normal B12 actually have suboptimal B12. Other ranges are set. So for example, serum magnesium, think that was set back in the 80s and it stayed the same ever since. It hasn't changed. So there's different markers that are set in different ways. The ranges that I use in my books have come from studies and from other people who work with blood test interpretation. So they're more of an optimal range. Doesn't necessarily correlate with your GP ranges. And B12 is the one that I get asked about the most because my range is so much higher than the GP range. And people always say, is it a typo? And I'm like, no, it's not a typo. It's just that's where we want your clients to be. We want them in the upper range. So they need to be red on their GP's blood results in order to be optimal. Not too red. We don't want them like sky high, but a little bit high, assuming there's no other conditions. High B12 can be really good, but it can also be a sign of liver dysfunction, certain cancers, certain other diseases. So we need to be wary. If someone comes back with high B12, if they're supplementing, that's fine. If they're not supplementing, we need to look at, well, why has that come back so low? Is there a problem? Is there anything we can do about it? Because we don't want it to be ignored if it needs to be looked at.
Do you also work with functional medicine ranges?
Some of them are functional ranges, and I know there's functional medicine doctors using my books. I wouldn't say mine are specifically functional medicine ranges.
What do you think about those ranges?
I think they're good. I think everyone has their own preferred ranges. Like I say, mine is mostly based on research. Some will be, just from their experience, they like to see thyroid in the higher ends because that's where they enjoy seeing it. That's what they prefer. That's what they've seen their clients do well with, not necessarily based on research. So everyone has their own preferences, I guess is the way to say it. Yeah, I don't have any negative things to say about functional medicine ranges. I think you need to be consistent. So if you're comparing your bloods to one set of ranges, stick with that set of ranges to look at your progress. If you're looking, let's say you're looking at your bloods compared to the NHS ranges, and then you look at them compared to private ranges, and you're switching between the two ranges all the time, that's not going to work for you. You need to stick with a set of ranges. The other thing that we do is we don't just look at ranges. So functional medicine practitioners, nutritional therapists, what we're doing is we're not just going, oh, your total cholesterol is high, you need statins. It's, oh, your total cholesterol is high, right? Let's look at why. Let's look at what's going on. What's the bigger picture here? And we're looking at all the other markers around your total cholesterol to see what's going on there. Same for your thyroid, same for your iron, same for your B12, same for everything. Why is it low? Like you said yourself, you have vitamin D receptor issues. So you've done genetic testing to understand your vitamin D. We can do genetic testing to understand thyroid. Some people just don't convert their T4 to T3 well, and that's genetic. There's nothing we can do about that, apart from optimize everything we can to make it work as best it can from T4 to T3, but there's not much more that we can do than that. So yeah, genetics and the bigger picture is always really important.
I realize now that we're getting into a very advanced conversation about nutrition among a nutritional therapist and functional medicine, and our listener probably don't know what a nutritional therapist actually is compared to a nutritionist and a dietitian, and what functional medicine is. Do you want to help with that?
If we start with your GP is looking to diagnose disease. So you go to your GP and say, I feel tired. They're going to rule out severe thyroid dysfunction. They're going to rule out cancer. They're going to rule out anemia. They're going to rule out anything else that is really, really diagnosable and probably needs medicating or referral to a specialist. 99 times out of 100, you'll be told there's nothing wrong with you or everything was normal, and nothing comes out of that conversation. Maybe one or two people might be told you need to go and see a specialist, or we think there might be something else going on. Please go and get this looked into. But 99% of people, nothing's going to come out of it. The 1 or 2% who had some abnormalities might be sent to a dietitian. And a dietitian is someone who works with the NHS, and they are trained to say, right, you have constipation. This is how we manage constipation. You have diabetes. This is how we manage diabetes. Now, I'm not going to generalize too much because there are some amazing dietitians out there, but there are also many stuck within their remit on the NHS to only deal with one condition at one time. And that can be really frustrating. I've had clients who have constipation and diarrhea been sent to their NHS dietitian, and the 2 pages don't match up with each other. Eat more of this for diarrhea, eat more of this for constipation, but there's no crossover between the two. They're not being managed for 2 conditions. They're being managed separately, and it doesn't really work for them. Dietitians working on the NHS are very stuck within their remit. They work very similar to your doctor managing disease. Then we have dietitians working privately who might call themselves nutritionists. This is where it gets to be a bit grey. They are freer. They can do a bit more. Generally, they work with you with your disease, but they look around your disease and see what else they can help with. Then we have nutritional therapists like myself and Severine. We're trained to work with food, basically. So we're looking at the bigger picture, looking holistically. What can we do with food? Are there any supplements that might help you short term? But really, we want to do it with food and get everything working. There's always an answer for why something's not working, and we're trained to dig and dig deeper and find out why. What is the why? What's causing this? Why have you got menopause symptoms? Why have you got hot sweats? Why have you got fatigue? Why have you got all these problems? Let's dig, let's find it, whether that means blood testing, genetic testing, diet changes, lifestyle changes. That's what we're here to do. Did that answer your question? I think that answered your question.
Yeah, it's a beautiful answer. And what about functional medicine now?
Oh, functional medicines, yeah. So they vary. In my experience, they vary. You get some amazing ones, often quite expensive because their registration fees to be registered as a private functional medicine doctor are just sky high. So they've got to make their money back somehow. So they're often quite expensive to see. They've got access to private prescriptions for medications. So in the case of someone who is perimenopausal but doesn't need estrogen, there are functional medicine practitioners who specialize in menopause but might only give progesterone prescriptions. And that's great if that's the way you want to go. If you don't want to go through food and lifestyle changes, maybe that's the option for you. Functional medicine, they work very much like your GP. They're looking to diagnose. Some are trained more holistically and they will be looking at everything else that's going on, but not all. So you need to choose wisely, I would say, if you're looking to work with a functional medicine practitioner.
Now, once the interpretation of the test is done correctly and the treatment is underway, is it advisable to repeat the test? And if so, how long after we start the treatment shall we retest?
Once you've had a blood test done and you start working, I'd say no sooner than 8 to 12 weeks. I'd say by the time you get to about 6 to 7 weeks, start thinking about booking your blood test at that point. You might need to arrange a private nurse. You may need to arrange an appointment with a phlebotomist like me. You may need to go and see your GP and get that all scheduled in, and it can take a few weeks to get it all put together. But I would say make sure you test by 12 weeks, because by the time you get to 12 weeks, your motivation is waning. And you need that bit of reassurance that all that hard work you're putting in is giving you some results, or that the hard work you're putting in isn't working and maybe you need to be doing something else. You don't want to go on too long and then find out it was doing nothing, but you also don't want to go on too long and find out it wasn't enough, or that it was working too well and you need to come back a little bit. So it's important to test. And I'd say 8 to 12 weeks is a good window, about 2 to 3 months.
Now I'd like to discuss your books. I know you've got a series of 4 books about interpreting tests. The first one is about interpreting blood test results for fatigue. The second one is for hormones. Third one for cardiovascular disease. And the last one for allergies, intolerances, and sensitivities. You mentioned already what motivated you to write these books, but can we expect more in the series?
I wrote the first one in lockdown, thought my mum would buy it, but it went bestseller overnight. Probably sell about 100 copies of that every month. It kind of peaks every time colleges take on a new cohort of students. So it sells really well twice a year. I think it's September and January, something like that. It peaks. So that sells really, really well. That's the first one. Book writing is quite addictive. I quite like taking some time out, sitting quietly and just writing. I quite enjoy that. So the other ones are more projects of, I want to say projects of passion, but I don't know if that's the right phrase to use. It's just something that I really enjoy doing. And so, yeah, I've written the other ones just because I love writing. I've even written a course in how to write your own book. And I think there's about 40 nutritional therapists I'm teaching how to write their own books now so that they can get their message out as well. Or, write a book and get their mum to buy it. That's fine as well. Book 5, I came up with a couple of weeks ago. In book 1, if you've ever read it, there's the thyroid chapter. And there's a paragraph in there where it says, I could write a whole book on autoimmune disease, so I'm not going to try and put it into one chapter here. And I forgot all about it. And then I was using my book. I use my books. I use them in clinic all the time. And I was using my book in clinic and I saw that paragraph and I thought, oh, wow, there's book 5. I already decided the topic for book 5. It's right there in book 1. So autoimmune disease is book 5. Hashimoto's, Graves, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, celiac disease, looking at all the different markers, looking at how you can get the GP to test for them and just what can you do about them. And that's coming from scientific research as before. So that will be book 5. And then book 6 is not going to be a blood labs book. It's going to be part of my writing, but it's not for blood test interpretation. It will be a handbook for trainee phlebotomists because I train phlebotomists, and it would be a nice little handbook for them to have a little training journal and some information that they need.
And where can we find your books?
So they're on Amazon. So amazon.co.uk. You just search for blood labs. So I don't know if the lighting will show you, but blood labs is the title of the book. Or you can search by my name, Kate Knowler, and they will come up. I've also got some notebooks on there, so don't buy the notebooks and think you're going to get content. They're just notebooks. They were for my group members where I support nutritional therapists. I was giving them notebooks to write their notes down in. Or you can go to my website, kateknowler.co.uk. If If you wanted to work with me, you can book appointments through there as well. But there's also, I think it's on the practitioner page, there's my bookshop, and you can buy the books through there as well.
For individuals without practitioner training who wants to use your books for interpreting results, or at least for understanding the test they need, would this book help?
The books are good if you're trained in nutritional therapy and you understand. So there's a lot of terms that I use about anemia, different terms that might be a bit too much for you to read through if you haven't got much experience. A lot of us now, we have Google, we have YouTube, we have all this social media at our hands. We have so much information on internet that we've done the research. We're almost nutritional therapists, even without studying. There might be a few missing gaps, but we know a lot of what we need to know. So the books may be useful, but please do not diagnose yourself. The books may lead you along a path of diagnosis. As nutritional therapists, we're taught not to diagnose. We support our patient or our clients. We don't diagnose. Okay, so it's really important that as you're reading the book, you're not going, oh, I've got iron deficiency anemia. I need to take iron tablets. I need to do this. If there's something that needs to be diagnosed, your GP must diagnose it, and you must agree the action plan with your GP. We would do that as nutritional therapists for you. So if we think you're anemic, we would write to your doctor. We would get them to approve supplementation. We would get all of that in place. I said doctors frustrate us because we can't get the right test through them. We still have to work with them. I don't work against doctors. I definitely work with doctors. So if you're reading the book and you're not trained in nutritional therapy, please don't be tempted to self-diagnose.
I couldn't agree more with you actually on that. Even though we have a very lengthy training of 3 years and more actually, because we need to do all these CPDs and we know exactly about diseases and conditions and how to diagnose them and how to treat them. We are not legally authorized to diagnose or treat. We're just helping the condition, helping improve the symptoms. So it's very important that you go to the GP and do what you have to do. And you can always hire us to help, but the GP is the first point. And then if the GP doesn't do anything because you're not officially sick, but you can feel that there is still an issue, then you can come to us. We're helping people get better. And as long as you feel like you can get better and you want to get better, we're here to help. Helping so many individuals and practitioners, what would you say has been the most rewarding aspect of your professional journey so far?
Gosh, I do so many different things. If we're talking about phlebotomy, so I started my phlebotomy school in November, and I have 4 or 5 fully trained, competent, insured phlebotomists out there now taking blood from their clients. And it's amazing on their competency day. So I've trained them on plastic veins, I've trained them with all the needles and everything. And then on a competency day, we have 10 volunteers in, and I train them on actual human arms. And it's amazing to see them. So I did one yesterday, 8:30 in the morning. She was petrified. She's got her own phobia of needles, but she wanted to introduce this to her clinic. So she did 3 blood draws on me and she was shaking. She was so nervous. By 2:00, she was winging that needle in the arm, blood out, done, tourniquet off, absolutely perfect, not even a hesitation. It's so wonderful to watch those 6 hours, that progression through 6 hours. So, so nice. So that's really rewarding for me because that's a whole new phlebotomy army going out there, and I'm building it from the scratch. Rewarding for me, I guess, is hearing when people just, they get the answers that they're looking for with me. They're getting the support that they need, and I'm improving their confidence. It can be really nerve-wracking if a client sits down in front of you and they've got all these results from the GP and you just don't know where to start with interpreting them, and you don't really want to do that in front of your client because you might get it wrong. But actually, there's some really simple rules that I can teach people how to avoid getting things wrong, how to make sure you've checked everything on a first run through, and you can do that in front of your client and you can sound knowledgeable. I'm not saying that nutritional therapists aren't knowledgeable, but there's so much that we need to know that sometimes knowing the numbers for the ranges, it's really hard to keep them in your head. I don't keep them. Like I said, I use my books in clinic all the time. I use my books when I'm coaching nutritional therapists as well. There's nothing wrong with not having the numbers in your head, but it's a confidence thing. So it's nice to hear when people feel more confident with what they're doing. And I know that they're then out there helping their clients more.
And finally, for those who would like to connect with you, where is the best way to reach out?
I've got my website, which is kateknowler.co.uk. That's the place for booking appointments, buying books, finding out about my phlebotomy school. Everything is on there. You've got my Instagram, which is bloodlabs.kateknowler. That is more aimed at practitioners. By all means, do follow. I do share information on there about blood test interpretation and things that I've got coming up. So it might be something relevant for you. Otherwise, my LinkedIn is probably the best place, and that's just Kate Knowler on LinkedIn. That's information about what I'm up to at the moment. Do feel free to find me wherever you may find me, or you can email me. It's clinic, so CLINIC, kateknowler.co.uk.
Thank you so much, Kate, for this enlightening chat and sharing your expertise and experience with us today. Thank you to our listeners. If you've enjoyed this interview, perhaps you'll enjoy this one or that one. And if you've found it useful, please like this video and leave a comment with your questions and thoughts. Have you also considered to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest interviews? Until next time, stay healthy.